At number 12, meet the man who helped win an empire he couldn't keep, Diego de Almagro. Born in Castile in 1475, Almagro wasn't the most impressive figure, but he was relentless. He teamed up with Francisco Pizarro and became one of the key hitters in the fall of the Inca Empire, a frontline workhorse who tanked the worst terrain and the dirtiest jobs. But once the conquest was over, the loot split wasn't what he expected, and it triggered him. Spanish chroniclers remembered him saying, "I came to these lands to share honors, not to beg for them." Driven by pride and resentment, he gambled everything on a disastrous expedition to Chile, a death march that delivered nothing but frostbite and casualties. He returned furious and broke, igniting a civil war with the Pizarros at Cusco, even capturing Hernando Pizarro before losing the final battle, and getting executed for his trouble. His playstyle? The stubborn bruiser, strong in battle, terrible at politics. Diego de Almagro lands in Tier 3 because he helped conquer Peru, but couldn't survive the aftermath. Before we move on, secure your share of the loot. Tap subscribe so Pizarro doesn't take it first. At number 11, say hello to the scout who turned a dying expedition into a world-changing discovery, Francisco de Orellana. Born in Trujillo around 1511, Orellana wasn't a frontline killer. He was a stabilizer, the kind who keeps a level head when everyone else hits the panic button. When Gonzalo Pizarro's trek into the Amazon depleted their resources and hunger started chipping away at their HP bars, Orellana was sent downriver to search for food. But the current was too strong to return and his men too weak, so he kept drifting east, accepting his fate, saying, "Forward then, and let God guide the current." His crew navigated through a couple thousand miles of unknown jungle waterways and accidentally completed the first full descent of the Amazon River in the process. But the price of discovery was brutal. Between poison darts from indigenous warriors, caimans dragging men underwater, infections rotting limbs, and starvation, the Amazon piled on environment damage like a meat grinder. His playstyle? The survival navigator. Low aggression, high composure, mission first instincts. Francisco de Orellana lands in Tier 3 because he pioneered the Amazon and held his crew together in a crisis, but never logged the kinds of victories that shift continents. At number 10, meet the survivalist of the Inca frontier, Gonzalo Pizarro. Born in Trujillo in 1502, Gonzalo's defining campaign began when he was ordered to explore the eastern Andes and walked straight into a nightmare. Once he crossed the mountains, his army was decimated by tropical rot, relentless raids from hostile tribes, swarms of insects, and non-stop hunger. His men ate horses, leather, and whatever wouldn't kill them instantly. Most commanders would have folded. Gonzalo kept marching. When he realized Orellana wouldn't be returning from the river, Gonzalo clawed his way back over the Andes with a handful of walking skeletons, including himself, and staggered into a Spanish-controlled Quito after months of starvation and loss. His final act was rebellion. He seized control of colonial Peru and held it for a few years before the crown spawned its final boss, kicking Gonzalo to the execution screen in 1548. His playstyle? The Iron Survivor. Endless stamina, terrible judgment. Gonzalo Pizarro lands in Tier 3 because he survived a couple big levels, but never got a W that really changed anything. At number 9, meet the explorer who changed Spain's whole understanding of the world map, Vasco Núñez de Balboa. Born in Jerez de los Caballeros around 1475, Balboa was a patient operator, the kind of guy with a sixth sense for the minimap. When he founded Darien on the Isthmus of Panama, he turned a collapsing economy into Spain's first stable foothold on the Pacific side of the Americas. Then came the moment that defined him. Upon hearing rumors of a western sea, Balboa rallied his men with a simple line: "The sea lies beyond these mountains, and I will reach it or die in the attempt." With that, he crossed the jungle mountains of Panama and became the first European to see the Pacific Ocean from the Americas, a discovery that redrew Spain's map overnight. But success made him dangerous. A new governor, Pedro de Valdivia, saw Balboa's fame as a threat, branded him a traitor, and had him dragged into a sham trial before ordering his execution in 1519. His playstyle? The Pathfinder. Calm, methodical, and quietly sharp. Balboa lands in Tier 3 because he made a discovery that shook an empire, but couldn't stay alive long enough to enjoy the XP. For number 8, we've got the aggro tank who bulldozed Spain's way into western Mexico, Nuño de Guzmán. Born in Guadalajara, Spain around 1490, Guzmán wasn't a diplomat. He was a force of nature commander who treated expansion like a speed run. As governor of Nueva Galicia, he launched brutal campaigns through Michoacán, Jalisco, and Nayarit, smashing resistance with overwhelming force. Guzmán didn't negotiate, he imposed. When ambassadors approached him for peace, he treated it as weakness. Entire towns were uprooted or enslaved under his rule. Soldiers recalled Guzmán saying, "Peace is granted only after submission." A philosophy that turned entire towns into targets. But despite his heavy-handed mentality, the man delivered results. His offensives opened vast sections of western Mexico, founding cities like Guadalajara and clearing the northern route toward Culiacán. Guzmán's cruelty was legendary, but so were his territorial gains, controlling more than 90,000 square miles of western Mexico at his peak. Eventually, his brutality caught up with him. Rivals accused him of corruption, torture, and unauthorized wars, and the crown dragged him back to Spain in chains for trial. He survived, barely, but was stripped of all power politically and militarily, effectively banned from the server for life. His playstyle? The aggro tank. Massive damage, zero restraint, always wanted to play with friendly fire enabled. Guzmán lands in Tier 2 because his campaigns carved out huge regions, but his trigger-happy tendencies made him too unstable to rise any higher. At number 7, meet the fog of war eraser who rode straight into blank map tiles and turned them into known territory, Hernando de Soto. Born in Extremadura, Spain around 1500, De Soto was more than a raider. He ran a mobility build, fast strikes, quick retreats, and lots of loot. He first made his name under Pizarro in Peru, where his horsemen were basically recon cavalry units. But his real legacy formed during his speedrun of Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. Hernando was obsessed with gold and with finding another empire to conquer. De Soto didn't march, he surged. Charging horses, shock attacks, and psychological pressure turned every encounter into chaos. He carried a small chest around too, everywhere he went, convinced every new riverbank was hiding another gold strike. Several of his men later recalled him saying, "We shall find wealth or die searching." But the campaign hollowed out. Disease, miscalculations, and resistance shredded his party, and De Soto died, likely of fever, near the Mississippi River in 1542. His men sank his body at night to keep enemies from learning their commander wasn't immortal. But even the pros hit game over eventually. His playstyle? The speedrunner. High speed, burst damage, always on the hunt for gold. Hernando de Soto lands in Tier 2 because he mapped more ground than any conquistador of his era, but his campaign collapsed before he could turn exploitation into empire. At number 6, meet the mission-focused workhorse, Gonzalo de Sandoval. Born in Medellin, Spain around 1497, Sandoval wasn't the loudest or deadliest captain. He was the reliable one, the guy Cortés sent in when he needed a clean W without the drama. Sandoval earned his stripes during the conquest of Mexico, running Cortés's most important side quests, securing supply lines, capturing enemy positions, and holding territory when everyone else was burning stamina bars. When a town needed subduing, Sandoval took it. When Cortés needed reinforcements, Sandoval delivered them. When the campaign hinged on a single tactical play, Sandoval was usually the one executing it. During the siege of Tenochtitlan, he commanded key causeways, cut off escape routes, and orchestrated the kind of disciplined pushes that let the flashier conquistadors shine. He wasn't showy, he was consistent, accurate, and always on mission. But the grind caught up with him. Years of non-stop campaigning wrecked his health, and Sandoval died young in 1528 on the voyage back to Spain, most likely from malaria or a long festering infection he picked up from the war. His playstyle? The reliable carry. Low profile, high impact, always landing the clutch play. Gonzalo de Sandoval lands in Tier 2 because he delivered flawless victories, but never had the chance to level up to his final form. At number 5, meet the quiet professional who stabilized half of northern South America, Sebastián de Benalcázar. Born in Benalcázar, Spain around 1480, he wasn't a berserker or a glory chaser. Sebastián played the long game, a methodical commander who won fights by making fewer mistakes than everyone else. His rise began under Pizarro during the conquest of Peru, where he became the tactical backbone of the operation, holding ground, reinforcing weak points, and keeping the campaign on script. But his true impact came when he was sent north, a move that turned him into the Spanish Empire's map maker. Sebastian marched into what is now Ecuador and Colombia, securing Quito, defeating local resistance, and establishing Spanish control through precision instead of chaos. He founded cities like Cali and Popayan, often arriving in contested regions, reading the political terrain like a strategist checking the dungeon map, and locking down territory before rivals even realized that the meta had shifted. Where other conquistadors erupted, Sebastian organized. Where others burned everything, he built frameworks Spain could actually hold. Chroniclers later paraphrased him with a line that fit his entire playstyle: "We don't need glory, we need order." But rival Spaniards ended up dragging him into lawsuits and accusations, which eventually led to his arrest late in life. His playstyle? The tactical anchor. Steady pressure, clean execution, zero friendly fire. Benalcázar lands in Tier 2 because he secured massive regions for Spain that would last, but was bullied out of the game by other players before he could level up any higher. Before we breach the Final Four, if this siege has your XP bar flashing, go ahead and hit subscribe. We break down history's deadliest characters every week. Don't miss the next raid. At number 4, meet the hard mode colonizer who refused to log out, Pedro de Valdivia. Born in Extremadura, Spain around 1497, Valdivia was an endurance player, built for long campaigns, not quick strikes. His legend formed in Chile, the toughest brick wall region in the entire Spanish campaign. Valdivia marched south with barely a few dozen men, pushing through deserts, mountains, and supply shortages that would have triggered a rage quit from anyone else. But he kept going, founding Santiago in 1541 and turning it into a permanent base in a zone that did not want him there. Chronicles remembered him declaring, "I, Pedro de Valdivia, promise to defend this land." Then came the real boss fight, the Mapuche. At Quilicura, Valdivia marched his men into what looked like a deserted hillside, only for Mapuche warriors to erupt from dugout pits and tree cover. Their volleys shattered the front ranks, and the Spanish formation wobbled hard. Valdivia pivoted instantly, turning the cavalry loose in a tight wedge that smashed the ambushers and scattered them long enough to regroup. After that day, he treated every mile of Chile like a hostile dungeon crawl. But even he couldn't tank forever, and after a decade of holding the line, Valdivia was captured at the Battle of Tucapel in 1553 and publicly executed by Mapuche warriors. They broke his arms, mutilated him alive, and finished him with spears. The Mapuche were the one boss battle Valdivia could never beat. His playstyle? The frontier tank, high endurance, base builder energy, and incredibly persistent. Pedro de Valdivia lands in Tier 1 because he carved Chile out of chaos and held the line in a region that no one else even wanted to touch. At number 3, meet the burst damage specialist who played every campaign on Fast Forward, Pedro de Alvarado. Born in Badajoz, Spain around 1485, Alvarado wasn't subtle. He was all speed, all aggression, all the time. His rise began under Cortés, where he became the golden-haired cavalry hammer of the Mexico campaign. But Alvarado's real legend formed in Central America. He blitzed through Guatemala with terrifying momentum and forced marches that pushed his men and his enemies past the red line. Cities fell so fast that chroniclers joked he was too quick for the pen. During the campaign in El Salvador, Alvarado forced his men through a sleepless night march and ambushed the Cuscatlan forces at dawn, catching them so off guard that the entire front line collapsed before they could even form ranks. His soldiers described him as saying, "Let them feel our speed." And he wasn't just a raider, he built foundations. He established the early Spanish footprint in Guatemala and El Salvador, locking down territory with a mix of speed, intimidation, and ruthless precision. In one campaign, after crossing a river under fire, Alvarado ordered the bridge burned behind his own men so no one could retreat. A terrifying move, and exactly the kind of all-in aggression he was known for. But his volatility burned him. Alvarado was notorious for overextending, the kind of commander who'd rush a boss arena without checking his HP bar. It finally caught up with him in 1541 when he tried to help put down a rebellion in western Mexico. A horse fell on him during a chaotic retreat, crushing him. The fastest man in the conquest, frozen in a single moment, a sudden and brutal end. His playstyle? The Lightning Raider. Explosive openings, zero cooldowns, constant pressure. Pedro de Alvarado lands at number 3 because nobody hit harder or faster. At number 2, meet the cold-blooded ambusher who erased an empire with fewer than 200 men, Francisco Pizarro. Born in Trujillo around 1475, Pizarro wasn't noble, polished, or educated. He was a late-game optimizer, a commander who studied the meta, watched for openings, and struck only when the odds bent his way. His most legendary story took place at Cajamarca in 1532, when Atahualpa, the Inca emperor, arrived with thousands of unarmed attendants. Pizarro turned the plaza into a kill box. Hidden cavalry, concealed artillery, disciplined infantry, all waiting on his signal. And when the moment hit, Pizarro unleashed a perfectly timed ambush that shattered the Inca chain of command in minutes. Atahualpa was captured, the empire's leadership grid went dark, and Pizarro spent the next year manipulating the emperor like a paralyzed NPC. From there, he didn't conquer Peru so much as reprogram it. He forged alliances with anti-Inca factions, weaponized existing rivalries, and built a puppet state architecture that let a small Spanish force control millions. Where others swung swords, Pizarro pulled levers. But power cuts both ways. Spanish-on-Spanish violence turned Peru into a PvP arena. In 1541, supporters of his rival Diego de Almagro II stormed his palace in Lima. He held the doorway like a dying boss, cutting down anyone who stepped through, until one blade finally slipped past his guard. Then another, then a dozen more, carving him apart on the stone tiles of his own home. Witnesses claimed his last word was Jesus, whispered while he traced the shape of a cross in his own blood on the palace floor. His playstyle? The ambush architect. Zero emotion, maximum setup, master of the opening strike. I rank Francisco Pizarro number 2 because he deleted the Inca Empire with one perfectly timed ambush and rebuilt the Andes around his own ruthless calculations. At number 1, meet the strategist who didn't just win battles, he rewrote the entire rulebook of Mesoamerica, Hernán Cortés. Born in Medellin, Spain in 1485, Cortés wasn't the strongest swordsman or the bravest rider. He was the mastermind, a player who read the whole map, predicted enemy moves, and built alliances like a political speedrunner. His first genius move came the moment he landed. Cortés scuttled his own fleet, deleting the retreat option from the menu and locking his men into a one-way campaign. Then he flipped entire city-states to his side. Tlaxcala, the Totonacs, every rival of the Aztec Empire. Where other conquistadors took territory, Cortés took information. Tribute resentments, political fractures, enemy rivalries, he took them all and weaponized them. Then came the main boss level, Tenochtitlan. Cortés marched straight into the capital and seized Moctezuma inside his own palace, a political crit hit no one else on this list could have survived even attempting. And when the final siege began, he built warships in the mountains, hauled them piece by piece to Lake Texcoco, and used them to choke off the city like a map control mastermind. When Tenochtitlan fell in 1521, it wasn't because the Spaniards were stronger. It was because Cortés outplayed a superpower with timing, psychology, and perfect exploitation of the meta around him. But the empire he built eventually turned against him. Accused, humiliated, and buried under endless lawsuits, Cortés found himself stripped of authority, ignored by the crown, and forced into retirement. Sidelined and bitter, he muttered that if only he'd conquered Peru instead, I would not be treated this way. Cortés was a legendary player, forced to watch the end game from the bench. He conquered an empire and lost to bureaucracy, dying in Spain in 1547. His playstyle? The grand strategist, alliance builder, map reader, master of the long game. Hernán Cortés ranks at number 1 for me because he didn't just conquer an empire. He dismantled it with strategy, timing, and a level of political gameplay nobody else on this list could match. And those were the 12 Deadliest Conquistadors, men who changed maps, broke kingdoms, and left the world permanently patched. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next raid. And seriously, if you haven't watched 12 Deadliest Cowboys yet, do yourself a favor and check it out. It's pure frontier chaos from start to finish. Catch you in the next conquest.